The Senate Banking Committee hearing room fell into a sharp, almost chilling silence, just as Senator Barack Obama leaned into his microphone, his voice cutting across the chamber with that unmistakable calmness that could either comfort or crush, depending on the moment. This time, it wasn't comfort. "Representative Crockett," he began, tone steady but edged. "You talk often about helping communities, but what have you actually done besides make noise on social media?" The attack wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was precise, like a blade laid gently across a surface just deep enough to bleed. Designed to embarrass the Texas Democrat in front of millions watching from their homes, phones, and offices. What happened next? No one in that room was prepared for it. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She didn't shift in discomfort or glance down at her notes. Instead, she smiled, a slow, knowing smile, the kind that comes when someone has been waiting, quietly sharpening their tools, preparing for the exact storm now unfolding. Obama had no idea she had receipts. He had no idea she had layered facts, detailed prep, and a strategy sharpened by a lifetime of fighting uphill battles. He had no idea she was about to deliver a response that would leave not just him but the entire room completely stunned. And just like that, the moment shifted. This wasn't a disagreement. This wasn't a debate. This was the beginning of a political earthquake. Before we continue, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Now, let's step deeper into how Jasmine Crockett turned the tables on Barack Obama in a way no one saw coming. The stage had been set almost too perfectly. Senator Barack Obama, once the face of hope and pragmatism, now positioned as the measured, seasoned elder statesman of the Democratic Party, sat confidently behind his nameplate, certain he had found an easy target in the first-term representative. But confidence can be misleading, and Obama was about to learn that underestimating Jasmine Crockett was one of the biggest political miscalculations he'd made in years. It wasn't that he disliked her, it wasn't personal, it was worse. He dismissed her. The irony dripped through the room. Here was Obama, a man who had built a political career on steady optimism and thoughtful diplomacy, about to get schooled by a young progressive who had spent her life navigating the trenches of inequality and injustice. The establishment moderate versus the unapologetic fighter, the careful orator versus the quick-thinking attorney, the towering figure of Democratic history versus the rising star of Democratic future. Only one of them knew the storm they were stepping into. Minutes earlier, the hearing had been almost boring, routine discussions about CDFIs, banking regulations, technical amendments. Staffers had been half listening, reporters half typing, phones half charged, but tension had been simmering between Obama and Crockett for weeks, most of it hidden beneath polite exchanges and clipped smiles. Their disagreement on economic policy, particularly its impact on marginalized communities, had been a quiet, constant friction. Obama, the statesman, believed in systemic improvement through careful reforms. Crockett, the fighter, believed in direct structural change, fast, bold, unapologetic. Their visions weren't mutually exclusive, but they clashed enough to spark sparks in every political room they shared. 2 weeks earlier, Crockett had publicly criticized Obama's long-standing votes in an MSNBC interview, laying out point by point how his moderate record had, at times, fallen short for black communities. Her comments had gone viral, not malicious, but blunt, precise, and fiercely factual. Obama's camp hated it. They issued statements, they demanded context, they argued tone. But Crockett didn't back down. She did what she always did, returned with receipts, every claim verified, every statement supported, every moment weaponized with clarity. The simmering heat between them was bound to boil over. Today was the day. What made this confrontation so explosive was how casually Obama initiated it. He'd been questioning witnesses on the economic impact of federal programs when he suddenly pivoted, eyes shifting toward Crockett, the cameras catching every micro-expression. "You talk about helping communities," he repeated, "but what have you actually done besides make noise on social media?" Staffers looked up. Reporters straightened, C-SPAN cameras zoomed a little tighter. This was not a slip. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a challenge from one of the most influential figures in American politics to one of the most feared rising voices in Congress. To understand the weight of that moment, you must understand who Barack Obama was in this story and who Jasmine Crockett had become. Obama had risen through American politics as the embodiment of calm intellect and moral clarity, the first black president, a symbol of achievement, beloved, composed, thoughtful. After leaving office, he had taken on the role of party guardian, advocating moderation when politics threatened to spiral into extremes. For years, his voice had gone unchallenged within Democratic leadership. When he spoke, people listened. When he pointed, people shifted. Crockett wasn't built from that template. She came from South Dallas. She came from courtrooms where people's lives hung in the balance. She came from communities that didn't wait patiently for change. They fought for it. Her rise to Congress in 2022 marked the arrival of a new force, younger, sharper, more fearless. She didn't navigate politics through diplomacy. She navigated through truth, justice, and fearless confrontation. While Obama brought nearly 2 decades of political prestige into the room, Crockett brought lived experience, legal mastery, and a refusal to be minimized. Obama underestimated that combination badly. He'd grown so accustomed to being the unchallenged voice in rooms like these that he didn't recognize the trap he was stepping into. He believed that seniority and symbolism would carry the confrontation, but Crockett was more prepared than anyone realized. Her staff, known for detailed prep, had layered binders of briefings, district reports, policy tracking spreadsheets, talking points, and strategic counters. They anticipated the critiques she would face as a young black progressive woman. They anticipated skepticism, dismissiveness, professional condescension. What they didn't anticipate was that Barack Obama, the symbol of progress itself, would be the one delivering the attack. But Crockett handled it exactly the way she handled everything, with composure, precision, and the quiet confidence of someone who had already calculated her response. The hearing room was thick with expectation. Obama continued speaking, leaning into his role as mentor turned critic. "I've been doing this work for years," he said, his tone firm yet disappointed. "I've passed legislation, collaborated across the aisle, built coalitions. But all I see from you is tweets and TikToks and viral moments. Where's the substance?" Some staffers nodded, others froze. There are certain unspoken rules in Congress, and even former presidents usually respected them. Calling out a colleague's accomplishments, or questioning them publicly, was considered a last resort. Obama had crossed that line, but he didn't realize he had crossed it with someone who knew exactly how to respond. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't interrupt. She simply waited. And that waiting, calm, controlled, unwavering, began to unsettle the room. Some in the audience wondered whether she'd been blindsided. Others, those who knew her better, understood the silence was strategy. Obama misread the moment entirely. He watched her stillness and assumed it was hesitation. He believed he had rattled her, so he pressed harder. "I'm not trying to undermine your passion," he continued, "but if you want to be taken seriously in this institution, you must focus on results, not just reactions. Maybe you could learn something from those of us who've done this for a while." The tone carried something Crockett was all too familiar with. Patronizing guidance disguised as mentorship. She had been spoken to like this countless times, in law school, in courtrooms, in board meetings, in Congress. Not because she lacked skill, but because her confidence intimidated those who relied on authority rather than merit. And Obama had just done the same. He didn't intend harm, but intention doesn't erase impact. Crockett finally moved. She placed her pen down, straightened her posture, leaned toward her microphone, and the room knew this was the shift. This was the moment the storm rolled in. She inhaled, she spoke. The voice was calm, precise, devastating. "Senator Obama," she began, "since you asked what I've accomplished, let me tell you exactly what this freshman representative has been doing while you've been busy being the Democratic Party's symbolic voice of moderation." Those words cracked across the room. Shock, gasps, frozen stares. A direct hit at the core of Obama's political identity. The moment the room realized Jasmine Crockett wasn't intimidated, she was ready, and Obama had no idea what was coming next. The room froze around Jasmine Crockett as her words sliced through the silence. Obama leaned back slowly, eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in surprise. He had expected a rebuttal, maybe even a defensive explanation. He didn't expect this. Crockett's tone wasn't angry, it wasn't impulsive. It sounded like someone who had rehearsed this, someone who understood that moments like this, when seized correctly, could shift the ground beneath Washington itself. "Since you asked," she repeated, her voice steady enough to quiet even the shuffling of papers across the room, "let's talk about substance. Let's talk about actual work." It wasn't the volume of her voice that commanded attention. It was the certainty. Obama straightened slightly, and a few senators exchanged glances. They sensed something shifting, something neither polite nor subtle. "In my first year in Congress," Crockett continued, "I co-sponsored 47 pieces of legislation focused on economic justice, criminal justice reform, healthcare access, and community revitalization." A few eyebrows lifted. She wasn't speaking in generalities. She wasn't grandstanding. She came armed with facts. "That," she added, still calm, "is more legislation than you co-sponsored in your first 3 years in the House." A soft gasp rippled through the gallery seating. Obama blinked. He hadn't expected direct comparison. He definitely hadn't expected it to be accurate. And Crockett, she wasn't nearly done. She lifted her phone, not to scroll absent-mindedly, but deliberately, like an attorney reaching for a key exhibit. "Last month," she said, "my office assisted 847 constituents with federal agency issues, Social Security, veterans benefits, disability claims, immigration backlogs. We documented every case, every single one." She lifted her gaze. "Senator Obama, how many did your office assist last month? Do you know?" The question hovered in the air like a blade suspended above the table. Obama opened his mouth slightly, perhaps to respond, but Crockett moved faster, speaking before he could form a syllable. "Because, Senator," she continued, her tone tightening ever so slightly, "while you're critiquing my social media presence, I'm over here doing the work that actually changes people's daily lives." This time, the gasp wasn't soft. Reporters leaned forward, phones lifted discreetly. Every camera operator tightened their frame. She was building momentum with the precision of a seasoned litigator. "And since you mentioned the challenges in my district, poverty, crime, educational barriers, let me be very clear about the work I have done instead of just lecturing people about responsibility." The room leaned in. "I secured $3.2 million in federal funding for after-school programs in Dallas," she said. "Programs that keep kids safe, supervised, and on track for college." Obama blinked again, this time sharper, almost like the information stung. "I worked with local law enforcement to establish community-based policing initiatives that reduced violent crime by 15% in 3 of our highest-risk neighborhoods." Someone in the back murmured, "Wow," under their breath. "And I helped pass legislation increasing Pell Grant funding, directly benefiting students at historically black colleges and universities." Her rhythm was methodical, her tempo unbreakable, her command absolute. Obama's confident posture slowly deflated, not dramatically but noticeably. He was listening, really listening, and that was part of the spectacle. A former president now receiving a lesson in preparation from someone half his political age. But Crockett wasn't done. Her tone shifted, not louder, but more personal, more deliberate. "And Senator," she added, "you implied I care more about going viral than doing my job. Let me explain something to you." She leaned in slightly, eyes unblinking. "Social media is how many of my constituents learn what resources exist. When I post a TikTok explaining how to apply for federal student aid, it reaches 100,000 young people who would never see a traditional press release." A few older senators shifted uncomfortably. They didn't like being reminded of their technological irrelevance. "When I tweet about a town hall," Crockett continued, "attendance triples compared to mailed invitations. When I go viral for holding powerful people accountable, it's because I'm doing something you should appreciate more than anyone, bringing government directly to the people." There it was, the strike, not out of malice, but necessity. "You say you want accountability," she said. "I'm delivering it, in the courtroom, in committee hearings, in my district, and yes, online where millions can actually see it." For a moment, nothing moved. Obama stared at her the way a chess master studies the board a heartbeat after realizing they've misread a position. Not defeated, not humiliated, just surprised. Crockett wasn't attacking him personally. She wasn't diminishing his legacy. She wasn't rewriting his contributions. She was telling him, clearly, fearlessly, that his era of unquestioned authority had passed, and hers had arrived. "But what truly bothers me," she continued, her voice lowering in a way that made the entire room lean closer, "is your suggestion that I don't care about my constituents." That line froze the air. Because that was the one thing she did not tolerate, anyone questioning her commitment to the people who trusted her with their voice. "You don't get to imply," she said, "that a black woman who has spent her entire career fighting for marginalized communities somehow isn't serious enough because she uses modern tools to do her job." Obama inhaled slowly. Crockett didn't let the moment slip. "You wouldn't say that to a white colleague," she added quietly. "And you wouldn't say that to a man." The room stiffened. She wasn't accusing him of intentional prejudice. She was pointing to the way power operates, silently, unconsciously, structurally, even among those who should know better. Obama leaned toward his microphone. "Representative Crockett, I'm not finished." The 3 words landed like a gavel, sharp, final, unmistakable. Those who had underestimated her swallowed hard. She continued, "You asked about accomplishments, Senator. Let me contrast ours plainly." Her tempo slowed, becoming more surgical. "You voted against Medicaid expansion, legislation that would have given health care to thousands of black families. You voted against raising the minimum wage. You voted against student loan forgiveness. You voted against several measures designed to close racial wealth gaps." Obama opened his palms slightly, signaling he wanted to respond, but she held the floor with unbreakable command. You stood on a debate stage, she continued, telling America you were the candidate who could bring people together, but your voting record shows you've spent years choosing moderation over transformation, optics over impact, comfort over courage. Somewhere across the room, someone whispered, "Oh my God." Crockett wasn't just rebutting Obama, she was reframing the entire conversation about black leadership in American politics. Her voice softened, not weakly but poignantly. "I spent years as a criminal defense attorney," she said quietly. "I fought for people the system forgot, people the system threw away. I protected constitutional rights in courtrooms where justice often depended on who had the best lawyer, not who had the truth." Then she let the weight settle. "So, when you ask me what I've accomplished," she paused, "I've accomplished never forgetting where I came from." Her next words cracked the room open. "I've never sold out my community for political approval. I've never chosen acceptability over accountability. And I've never been so desperate for establishment praise that I'd compromise the people who, trust me." The hit was devastating, not because she insulted Obama, but because she illuminated a contradiction he had never been forced to confront publicly. Obama's response, tight jaw, controlled breath, showed something new. He wasn't angry. He was humbled. He had underestimated her. He knew it. Everyone knew it. "Representative Crockett," he finally managed, "that is completely What's inappropriate," she interjected, eyes locked on his, "is a black man in your position using establishment talking points to question a black woman who is doing the work every single day." And with that, she leaned back, finished, flawless, unshaken. The room stayed silent for a full 5 seconds, a rare, almost sacred stillness in Washington politics, before the committee chair scrambled to call for a recess, but it didn't matter. The moment was sealed. The cameras had captured everything, and outside the chamber, social media was already catching fire. The recess did nothing to slow the wildfire that had already started. By the time senators stepped out into the hall, staffers were whispering frantically, reporters were sprinting to corners for live stand-ups, and phones were vibrating non-stop with alerts, mentions, and forwarded clips. The confrontation between Barack Obama and Jasmine Crockett had detonated through Washington like a shockwave. Within minutes of the exchange, the clip hit Twitter, first in fragmented snippets, then in full context, then in edited compilations, then in slow-motion breakdowns, and every version carried the same energy. Jasmine Crockett, standing firm, steady, unbothered, unraveling a political giant stitch by stitch, with nothing but preparation and truth. The hashtag #Crockett vs Obama trended globally within 15 minutes. By the 30-minute mark, 24 political accounts had already posted side-by-side comparisons of Crockett's accomplishments next to Obama's early congressional record. Some of these posts were supportive, others were critical, but all of them amplified her voice far beyond the walls of the hearing room. On TikTok, young black creators dissected the moment with clinical precision. "That wasn't a clapback," one creator explained in a viral video. "That was a dissertation. That was a master's thesis in political accountability. She broke that man down syllable by syllable." A young woman stitched the clip with commentary. She didn't just respond, she exposed the whole pattern. Being underestimated is a language some of us know fluently. Instagram lit up with edits, graphics, memes, and carousel posts quoting Crockett's sharpest lines. The Shade Room posted a clip with the caption, "Auntie Jasmine said, 'I'm not finished,' and woo, Obama felt that." The comment section was wildfire, but interestingly, conservative social media was quieter. A few commentators attempted to criticize Crockett's tone, but the resistance was half-hearted. Even those who often opposed progressive Democrats refused to fully jump in because they knew the optics, they knew the substance. They knew Obama had stepped into a ring he thought he owned, only to realize the match was on Crockett's terms. But as the internet exploded, Washington reacted with something deeper. Recognition. This wasn't just entertainment. This was a shift. Even journalists, seasoned, cynical, hardened, found themselves whispering versions of the same line. Did Jasmine Crockett really just check Barack Obama on national television? And beneath all of that was a quieter, more uneasy question. What does this mean for the Democratic Party? Because the tension between Obama and Crockett wasn't just personal. It wasn't just ideological. It was generational. Obama had become the symbol of a certain kind of politics, measured, strategic, incremental, polite, even in the face of hostility. That approach shaped Democratic messaging for almost 2 decades. Many credited it as the reason Democrats held the White House for 8 years. But Crockett represented a shift just as powerful. one born from mobilization, digital fluency, and lived urgency rather than measured restraint. Her political instincts didn't mirror Obama's era. They reflected a landscape shaped by inequity, misinformation, and communities tired of waiting for change to arrive through diplomacy. For some, the clash between them felt symbolic, almost inevitable. Old guard versus new guard, pragmatism versus pressure, incrementalism versus immediacy. The thing about symbolism, though, is that it never stays symbolic for long. Obama's team moved quickly, their preparation evident even in crisis mode. They drafted a statement attempting to recalibrate his tone. Senator Obama values Representative Crockett's work and regrets that the discussion became personal. It didn't land well. The press response was lukewarm. Social media dismissed it instantly. Political analysts saw it as damage control rather than reflection. Obama appeared on MSNBC that evening, speaking slowly, carefully, attempting to explain his intention. But even the host, respectful, deferential, couldn't avoid asking why he'd used such dismissive language in the first place. Obama's answer felt thin, not untrue, not malicious, just insufficient, and that was the problem. This wasn't about intent anymore, it was about impact. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's camp was inundated with messages, emails, calls, interview requests, speaking invitations. Her staff couldn't keep up. Every progressive PAC wanted to feature her. Every major network wanted her live. Every political strategist wanted to explain what her response meant for the party's future. Inside her office, the mood was electric but grounded. Crockett did not celebrate, she did not gloat, she did not perform. She simply reviewed the flood of reactions with her team, made a few calls to local organizers in Dallas, checked in with her staff, and continued preparing for her next committee hearing. That was the thing about her. She wasn't chasing moments. Moments were chasing her. But while Crockett kept moving, the shockwaves kept spreading. Political scientists began issuing statements and interviews analyzing what had happened. Dr. Melanie Price from Prairie View A&M framed the moment clearly. This was a confrontation between two philosophies, representation built on assimilation versus representation built on direct challenge. Obama and Crockett are not enemies. They are simply products of two different political eras. The New York Times published an early evening editorial titled, "A New Democratic Voice Emerges." MSNBC's Joy Reid opened her show with a monologue. Jasmine Crockett didn't attack Barack Obama. She held him accountable. That is what leadership looks like moving forward. Meanwhile, in Republican circles, something quieter and more strategic was happening. Conservative strategists who had long positioned Obama as the Democratic Party's unassailable voice now saw what they hadn't seen before: vulnerability. Not because he was wrong, not because he was weak, but because the Democratic Party had become too large, too diverse, too multifaceted for one style of leadership to define. And Crockett represented a style they couldn't predict, couldn't counter, and certainly couldn't underestimate. In the House, younger Democrats rallied behind her almost instantly. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus privately texted her congratulations. Some older members were more skeptical, worried that the confrontation could fracture party unity. Others saw it as a sign that Democrats were entering a new era, one shaped by authenticity rather than hierarchy. But within all of this reaction, all of this noise, all of this frenzy, there was one voice that mattered most: Jasmine Crockett's, and she remained steady, composed, focused. Hours after the confrontation, she released a statement, not dramatic, not defensive, not inflated, just Jasmine. "I stand by every word I said today. I respect Senator Obama's career, but I will always defend my work and my community. Accountability is not disrespect." The clarity of that statement hit harder than any clapback. She did not diminish Obama, she did not apologize, she did not escalate. She simply affirmed her truth. But the political world wasn't done spiraling. Within 24 hours, fundraising surged across Democratic grassroots networks. Emails featuring Crockett raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for progressive candidates nationwide. College groups requested her as a keynote speaker. Media outlets shifted their weekend programming to cover the exchange. Think tanks began recalibrating their messaging strategies, sensing seismic change. And through it all, one theme rose to the surface: Jasmine Crockett had not just responded to Barack Obama, she had reframed what Democratic leadership could look like. Her combination of digital influence, legal expertise, and fearless advocacy represented a political energy neither party could ignore. Scholars began studying the confrontation as an example of how social media fluency and lived experience were reshaping congressional dynamics. Some even predicted, quietly, cautiously, that this moment might mark the rise of a new national figure. But if anyone asked Jasmine Crockett what she thought of that speculation, She'd probably just smile, that quiet, knowing smile, the same one she wore right before she dismantled Barack Obama in front of the country, not out of pride, not out of ego, but because she understood something Washington had not yet fully learned. You can't underestimate someone who's been preparing for this fight her entire life. Days after the hearing, the ripple effects were still moving through Washington like aftershocks. This wasn't one of those viral moments that explodes for 12 hours and disappears into the endless scroll. It stayed, it lingered, it embedded itself into conversations on the House floor, in Senate cloakrooms, on cable news panels, in podcasts, in classrooms, in barbershops, in group chats. People weren't just replaying what Jasmine Crockett said. They were replaying what Barack Obama didn't. For years, Obama had been the one delivering sharp, controlled takedowns, with a perfectly timed line, a pause, a look. But in this moment, he had been on the receiving end of that same energy, and the country watched as a new kind of leadership challenged his. In seminar rooms across the country, political science professors pulled up the clip like it was a newly released primary source. In this exchange, one professor explained to a room full of undergrads, you see the transformation of intra-party discourse. This is not opposition politics, this is accountability within the same coalition. Another professor pointed out something else. Obama used to be the insurgent voice against an old guard. Here he is the perceived establishment. Crockett steps into the role of insurgent. History repeats, but with different faces. Meanwhile, law schools began using the hearing as a case study. Jasmine Crockett's performance wasn't improvisation, it was structured argument, fact patterns, pressure points. It was how a trial lawyer dismantled a hostile narrative without raising her voice or losing control of the room. Clips circulated in group chats with messages like, "This is how you advocate without apologizing for existing. This is how you respond when someone with more status underestimates you." Young black women especially saw something deeply familiar in the exchange. Not just the content, but the posture, the calm, the way she refused to shrink, refused to soften, refused to package herself in a way that made others more comfortable. They felt that in their bones. For them, Jasmine wasn't just a politician, she was a mirror. Before we continue, if you were in Jasmine Crockett's shoes, facing someone as iconic and respected as Barack Obama, questioning your work in front of the whole country, what would you say? Comment your thoughts below. I read every single one. In private, Democratic leaders met behind closed doors. Some were uneasy. Obama had long been the party's moral compass, the unifying storyteller. Seeing him publicly challenged by a younger black Democrat unsettled them, not because she was wrong, but because it signaled a shift they weren't fully prepared for. How do we keep this from becoming a fracture? One senior Democrat asked quietly. Another shook their head. This isn't a fracture, they replied. This is evolution. They weren't wrong. The party had grown more diverse in race, age, ideology, and strategy. What once felt unified under a single banner now pulsed with multiple currents, multiple entry points, multiple pathways to justice. Jasmine Crockett's style wasn't a rejection of Obama's legacy. It was a response to the world that existed after it. She was operating in an era where incrementalism felt like suffocation to those who'd been waiting generations for structural change, where police killings, student debt, housing crises and medical debt didn't feel like policy debates. They felt like emergencies, and emergencies don't wait for careful, slow-moving consensus. Her rise didn't erase what Obama had accomplished, but it did question whether his way could still carry the weight of what came next. Republicans watched all this with a mix of fascination and discomfort. Some tried to spin the moment as Democrats eating their own, but the framing never stuck. The footage simply didn't support that narrative. The visual story wasn't chaos, it was clarity. A younger Democrat listing precise accomplishments, a legendary figure caught unprepared in the face of that preparation. Republican strategists, in their own quiet rooms, acknowledged the real problem. Say what you want about her politics, one strategist muttered, staring at the replay, but Jasmine Crockett knows how to command a moment. That's dangerous for us, because that was the thing. Crockett wasn't just good on paper. She wasn't just effective behind closed doors or in carefully edited ads. She was electric live, unfiltered, unscripted, unintimidated. Those are the politicians who dominate modern politics. Those are the politicians who can't be contained by talking points. As the weeks passed, the confrontation held its staying power. Podcasts dissected it from every angle. Progressive shows held it up as a victory for unapologetic leadership. Centrist voices tried to walk a line, praising Obama's overall legacy while acknowledging he'd misread the moment. Even some conservative commentators begrudgingly admitted that Crockett had outperformed expectations. Whether you agree with her or not, one conservative host said on air, she came with facts. Obama walked into that exchange assuming his status would carry it. He was wrong. The way people talked about Obama began to shift just slightly. He was still respected, still admired, still historic, but the aura of untouchability, that had cracked, not shattered, not destroyed, just cracked. Enough to let in a new understanding. No one, no matter how beloved, no matter how groundbreaking, is beyond accountability, especially not within their own community. In Dallas, Crockett's district hummed with pride. Her constituents had always known she was a fighter. They'd seen her in community centers, courtrooms, church halls, small offices where nobody was filming, nobody was tweeting, nobody was taking notes for cable news segments. They knew her before the clip, and now the rest of the country was catching up. Local organizers replayed the hearing in meeting spaces, not as entertainment, but as education. "You see how she never lost her cool," one organizer told a group of teens. "That's not weakness, that's discipline. She didn't meet disrespect with chaos. She met it with receipts." Another organizer pointed out a different lesson. She didn't let his reputation make her feel smaller. Some of you all walk into rooms and shrink because someone has a title. Stop doing that. You belong there too. Meanwhile, at the national level, Democratic groups began rethinking who they put in front of cameras. For years, they defaulted to senior members, safe voices, familiar faces. Now they had undeniable proof that newer voices, especially those who spoke with lived urgency and digital fluency, could move people in ways that traditional messaging couldn't. Crockett's name started to appear in conversations about the future of the party, not as a token, not as a symbol, as a player, a serious one. Even people who disagreed with her politics had to admit, as commentators did on CNN, MSNBC, and even reluctantly on Fox, that she had displayed something rare: preparation, clarity, moral conviction, and the ability to make all three visible in under 10 minutes. Back in the Senate, Obama adjusted. He wasn't oblivious. He heard the critiques, he saw the clips, he knew he'd misjudged the moment and misjudged her. People around him encouraged him to hit back, to reclaim the narrative, to remind everyone of who he was and what he'd done. But Obama didn't do that. He did something quieter. In private, he began asking more questions about how younger members were using social media not as vanity, but as infrastructure, about how digital platforms could translate into constituent services, community mobilization, and real-world impact, about how politics had changed since the days when a single speech could reset the tone of a nation. He didn't suddenly become Crockett's biggest fan, but he respected the lesson, because beneath the sting of that moment was something he did recognize: a younger leader doing what he himself had once done, challenging the existing order in the name of a broader, more inclusive vision. The difference now was that he was the existing order, and that was hard to sit with, but also necessary. In the end, that was one of the most powerful things about Jasmine Crockett's response. She hadn't tried to erase Obama. She hadn't tried to diminish his story. She had simply insisted that her story and her community's current reality mattered just as much. Her voice wasn't a replacement, it was an expansion, a reminder that the fight for justice doesn't stop when one historic barrier falls. It evolves, it multiplies, it demands new strategies, new courage, new voices. And whether Washington was ready or not, Jasmine Crockett's voice had entered that arena fully, and she wasn't leaving. As weeks turned into a month, the shock of the Obama-Crockett confrontation evolved into something deeper, something that couldn't be dismissed as a viral flare-up or a news cycle curiosity. It became a reference point, a cultural moment, a shift in how power was perceived inside the Democratic Party. You could feel it in committee hearings, where the tenor changed ever so slightly when younger members spoke. You could feel it in press conferences, where journalists started asking different kinds of questions. You could feel it in party strategy calls, where the old assumption that authority flowed downward from senior leadership no longer held the same weight. Obama still carried incredible influence. He always would. But the idea that influence alone could silence or steer the next generation, that myth dissolved the moment Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone and said, "I'm not finished." And the country hadn't been finished with it either. Political talk shows replayed the clip so often it became shorthand. Late-night hosts analyzed it, strategists dissected it, grassroots groups celebrated it. Even comedians joked about how Obama picked the wrong millennial to underestimate. But privately, behind the noise, away from public reaction, there were consequences, real ones. Inside Obama's orbit, some allies felt rattled. To them, the exchange wasn't just about being corrected or challenged, it was about a beloved political figure stepping into a battle that wasn't his to win. "He walked right into it," one longtime advisor muttered. "She had the facts, she had the receipts, he didn't read the room." But others offered a different reflection. "Obama needs to see this. The party he helped build isn't the party he's leading anymore. These young members aren't waiting for permission." That last part echoed through Democratic circles far beyond Washington. On the House side, a quiet shift happened. Younger lawmakers started asking Crockett to join their working groups, their task forces, their messaging coalitions, not because she had suddenly become a superstar, but because she had proven she could stand in fire without flinching. Some even confided that they'd been waiting for someone to challenge the party's revered elder statesmen, not to disrespect them, but to force them to see how quickly the ground had shifted under their feet. Meanwhile, in Republican strategy rooms, something else was happening. A warning, a recognition, a recalibration. Crockett is dangerous, one GOP strategist said in a leaked memo, not because of her ideology, but because she communicates like she's speaking directly to the culture, not at it. Another strategist pointed to the hearing clip and said, if Democrats are smart, they'll put her in front of every camera they can. And if they're dumb, well, we'll hope they're dumb. But Democrats weren't dumb. They were paying attention. Jasmine's inbox filled with invitations from state parties, college campuses, nonprofits, civic groups. Everyone wanted her insight, her energy, her presence. And yet, despite the national spotlight, her demeanor didn't change. She moved with the same grounded urgency she brought into Congress from day one. She responded to constituents first. She studied her committee briefs. She reviewed district reports. She refused to be swept up by the flood, but the flood kept rising. During a televised CNN town hall on black political leadership, a young woman in the audience stood and asked a question that caught the entire room off guard. Do you think Jasmine Crockett represents the future of the party? The panelists blinked, some thoughtfully, some nervously. One political commentator leaned into her mic. I think Jasmine Crockett represents the urgency of the moment, and moments like this shape the future. The conversation spiraled from there, touching on generational divides, digital influence, representation, and the evolving expectations of black political leadership. For decades, Obama's rhetorical style was the gold standard of political communication, hopeful, measured, emotionally resonant, but Crockett offered something different, not a replacement, not a contradiction, a next chapter. One built on clarity rather than diplomacy, on confrontation when necessary, on truth delivered without dilution, and many felt that shift personally. In community centers, people replayed her words, not because she embarrassed Obama, but because she voiced something they'd been feeling for years. Respectability politics had reached its limit, incrementalism had reached its limit, symbolic progress had reached its limit. People wanted something real, measurable, bold, fearless, the kind of leadership that didn't just honor history, but challenged it to do better. In Dallas, the impact was even more visible. Crockett's district office saw an unprecedented surge in young volunteers wanting to help with casework, event organizing, canvassing, and civic education. The clip had shown them something they rarely saw in politics. Someone like them, not diluted, not softened, not muted, commanding a room with dignity and power. Church groups invited her to speak on youth engagement. HBCUs asked her to headline political empowerment summits. Local newspapers ran features titled "The Congresswoman Who Went Viral by Telling the Truth." And through it all, Jasmine stayed Jasmine. Focused, determined, rooted. Yet she knew, quietly, privately, that her life had changed. You don't go toe-to-toe with Barack Obama on national television and walk away anonymous. One evening, after a long day of meetings, casework, and interviews, Crockett finally sat alone in her office as the building hummed with the quiet of after hours. She pulled up the hearing clip, not out of vanity, not out of ego, but out of reflection. She watched Obama's expression as she spoke. She watched her own poise. She watched the moment the room shifted. Not to relive it, to understand it, because she knew something most people didn't. That moment wasn't about beating Obama. It wasn't about clapping back. It wasn't about going viral. It was about demanding the respect she had earned and the respect her community deserved. Before we continue, if Jasmine Crockett's stand reminded you of a moment when you refused to shrink yourself, tell your story in the comments. These moments matter more than people realize. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling softly. She knew bigger battles were coming. This moment had elevated her, but elevation always comes with scrutiny, resistance, and new expectations. And she wasn't naive. She knew the political world wouldn't let her rise without trying to tear her down, but she also knew something else, something that gave her composure when others would shake. She wasn't building a career. She was building a record. Her accomplishments were real, her community knew her preparation was unquestionable, her commitment was unwavering. Obama may have underestimated her once, but nobody would make that mistake again. Not after this, not after the country watched a young black progressive stand her ground before one of the most iconic political figures of the 21st century. Not after her voice cut through the noise and showed millions what accountability looked like when delivered with truth and steadiness. Not after she proved that courage wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was controlled, deliberate, factual, and devastatingly calm. Jasmine Crockett didn't ask for a national moment. She made one, on her terms, in her voice. And Washington was only beginning to understand the full implications of what that meant. In the days that followed, it became impossible to pretend that the Obama-Crockett exchange had been a simple disagreement or a fleeting moment of tension. It had become a national conversation, not just on politics, not just on policy, but on generational power, racial representation, and the unspoken rules governing who gets to challenge whom in American leadership. In many ways, the reaction said more than the confrontation itself. Older black voters struggled with mixed feelings. Many of them revered Obama, not just as a political figure, but as a symbol of history, pride, and possibility. Seeing him challenged so directly, even respectfully, felt jarring. But even some of these older voters admitted quietly she wasn't wrong and she wasn't rude, she was prepared. Younger black voters, by contrast, felt something electrifying, something that resonated with the realities of their day-to-day lives. To them, Crockett's response wasn't disrespect. It was liberation. The country was witnessing the changing of an era, not because Obama's leadership no longer mattered, but because the next generation finally had the confidence to speak with its own voice. Political insiders saw it too. One Democratic strategist summed it up bluntly in a Politico interview. Obama walked in with his legacy. Crockett walked in with the moment. The moment won. But that didn't mean Obama faded away or sulked into silence. Far from it, he began adjusting, listening more, observing more closely, absorbing the implications of the clash, because Obama, for all his flaws, had always been a student of political currents, and even though he hadn't expected to be challenged so fiercely, he recognized that Crockett's approach reflected something essential, a political environment shaped not by speeches but by urgency, not by careful triangulation but by clarity, not by hierarchy but by truth. Even when uncomfortable, people from both sides of the aisle began reflecting on what accountability within a community really looks like. Some argued that black leaders should never publicly challenge one another, that unity should come before critique, but others pushed back strongly. Accountability is not betrayal. Growth is not disrespect. Progress demands friction. Crockett's exchange with Obama wasn't an attack. It was a necessary collision between experience and evolution, and the country had witnessed it in real time. Meanwhile, the academic world continued analyzing the moment with almost anthropological fascination. Sociologists wrote essays about the politics of respectability. Communications scholars highlighted the rhetorical shift in Democratic messaging. Law professors marveled at Crockett's courtroom caliber breakdown. Even business schools referenced the exchange as a model for assertive leadership under pressure. She had become more than a headline, she had become a case study, but while the country dissected her every word, Jasmine Crockett kept moving with the same relentlessness she always had. She didn't act like she'd won something. She didn't seek a victory lap. She didn't posture. No, she doubled down on the work. She championed new legislation. She expanded her constituent services. She appeared on community panels and small-town meetings. She taught young organizers how to navigate government systems. She acted as though the viral moment didn't define her. Her preparation did. That's what made her so dangerous to opponents, and so inspiring to supporters. She didn't let the moment consume her. She used the moment to sharpen her purpose. In the months after the exchange, something subtle yet powerful happened. People started quoting her. "I'm not finished" became a rallying cry. Not just for young progressives, not just for black women, but for anyone who had ever been talked over, overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. It appeared on T-shirts, on posters, on protest signs, in classrooms, in corporate diversity trainings, in social justice workshops, in online bios, in motivational speeches. 3 simple words, spoken calmly, not angrily, became a declaration, a boundary, a movement. But the real transformation was happening inside the Democratic Party itself. Crockett began receiving personal outreach from senior members who once kept their distance. Some asked for her perspective, some asked for her collaboration, some simply said, "I misread you." She took every meeting, not out of ego, but out of strategy, because she understood something the country was still learning. The future is built by those who show up prepared and stay prepared, even when the room wasn't built for them, even when the audience expects them to shrink, even when a towering political figure tries, intentionally or not, to place them in a smaller box. Especially then, and slowly, Barack Obama's perspective shifted too. He didn't issue a public apology. He didn't need to. But he did something far more significant. He reached out privately, not to defend himself, not to reclaim the narrative, but to listen, to hear her, to understand where he had misstepped, to acknowledge that leadership evolves beyond any one person's image or ideals. It wasn't a moment of surrender, it wasn't a moment of weakness, it was leadership growing in real time, recognizing a new era, a new voice, a new lens on the political world they both inhabited. And Jasmine Crockett, steadfast, principled, unflinching, met him with the same clarity she had shown publicly. Respectful but unwavering, honest but gracious, firm but not cruel. Because she wasn't fighting him, she was fighting for the standard, for the truth that leadership must be accountable, even when uncomfortable, especially when uncomfortable. Washington took note, and the country did too. Before we continue, let me ask you this. If you were standing in that hearing room, watching Jasmine Crockett refuse to shrink, would you have had the same courage? Tell me what part of her stand hit you the hardest. As the months passed, Crockett's influence only grew stronger. She took on bigger legislative fights, she mentored younger members, she became a trusted voice in caucus debates. Her communication style, clear, concise, direct, became a template others tried to emulate. And political commentators began saying something they'd never said about a first-term representative. She's positioning herself for national leadership, not because she was perfect, not because she wanted the spotlight, but because she operated with an authenticity both rare and necessary. People were tired of political theater, tired of polished answers, tired of rehearsed empathy. Crockett wasn't performing, she was telling the truth. And when truth is delivered calmly, confidently, and without apology, it reverberates. Even through the highest halls of power, even through generational divides, even through the legacy of a former president. That's what made the moment monumental. Not that Jasmine Crockett beat Barack Obama, not that she went viral, not that she made headlines, but that she proved something essential. Power is not a title. Power is preparation. Power is clarity. Power is courage delivered openly, even when the audience isn't ready. Obama had walked into the hearing with the advantage of history. Crockett had walked in with the advantage of truth. History blinked first, and Jasmine Crockett walked out of that room not just unscathed, but ascendant, a force, a voice, a leader, not because she sought it, but because she earned it. Calmly, methodically, and without flinching on live television. Thank you so much for watching this powerful political story unfold. If Jasmine Crockett's courage, clarity, and preparation inspired you, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your voice matters more than you know, and these stories only grow stronger when we grow the conversation together. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next powerful moment.